Thanks for joining us. I'm Martin Mascarenhas, and with me, my colleague, Dave McGrail. Hi, Dave. And Jaye Tillson from HPE Aruba. Nice to see you again, Jay.
Good to see you guys. Thank you.
And we're here today to talk about SSE. What is it and how to get it right, really. So maybe a good place to start, Dave. What is SSE and why is it important?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Martin. So SSE stands for Security Service Edge. It's a framework that Gartner defined, and it helps us talk about kind of network and security services that are effectively cloud delivered. I think the key tenet of it is it's about putting the right control in the right place between the user and the resource that they're trying to access. Right? So we've had this model of centralizing security capability in a data center and sending all the traffic from the user to that security stack and then onwards to wherever it needs to go. And that worked when the applications and the resources were in the data center. But we know nowadays they're not really there anymore, certainly not as much. Right? There's a lot more SaaS, there's a lot more public cloud, private cloud, and so on. And so sending all that traffic there to a centralized stack doesn't necessarily make sense. And all the capability in that stack typically was separate technologies that you needed to bounce the traffic through repeatedly. So you were increasing the number of hops and latency, and you were increasing the complexity of the integration that you needed to do to deliver all of those security capabilities. So SSE was defined as a different way of approaching that, putting the security controls in the right place. So just to give context of what capability we're talking about there, we're talking about things like secure web gateway, so that traditional proxy, content filtering, advanced threat protection, what we currently call CASB, so Cloud Access Security Broker, which is defining what you can and can't do once you get to a web page, for example. So we'll let you go and read Facebook, but we won't let you post. We'll let you check your webmail, but we won't let you upload attachments. That kind of capability there. That kind of ties quite closely with DLP, data loss prevention, where we categorize data as sensitive or non-sensitive, and we'll let you do different levels of activity depending on the sensitivity of that capability. And then firewall as a service, again, that ties back to the proxy, so all ports and protocols. And then the other really major component is what's currently known as ZTNA, Zero Trust Network Access, and that to kind of boil it down is ultimately like your traditional VPN, but delivered in a very different way, very different paradigm to connecting those users to those resources. And there's a conversation to have around how that could benefit and how you could achieve that.
That's a really good introduction, Dave. The two things that hit me straight away really are kind of complexity and a lot of different concepts that you mentioned. And I think, Jay, you can maybe give us some insight here. With that complexity, where on earth do you start? How do you kick off an SSE project, and what should you be focusing on?
Good question. I'd like to add slightly to what Dave said. I see SSE as an opportunity. And what I mean by that is it's an opportunity to simplify and consolidate a number of tools. So Dave mentioned those tools. He mentioned your CASBs and your DLPs and your firewall as a service and your secure web gateways and this new idea of ZTNA. Those historically have all been independent tools. A lot of them were on-prem tools, and they came from different manufacturers, different vendors, either software or hardware. So for me, SSE is this idea of consolidation, simplification, bringing them into a unified platform. As to where people should start, I'm seeing people really start with the biggest risk in today's world, and that's this concept of VPN replacement. So we are seeing in social media, in the press, even on TV, on the news, that a lot of cyber attacks are starting with VPNs, either directly attacking VPNs or because they're unpatched or unmanaged, or they come with inherent risks. people are being compromised there, and I'm seeing ransomware attacks and all kinds of attacks coming in through legacy VPN solutions. So although ZTNA is only an element of SSE, it's kind of the newest of those elements. Secure Web Gateway and CASB and those tools have been around for a while. Like I said, they were independent tools. So the power of SSE is that consolidation. But the ZTNA element is really a new way of doing remote access that is built on this foundation of zero trust, and really is all about giving people access from a device that's known and checked to an application or service that they need to do their job, and nothing more. Historically, with legacy VPNs, pretty much everyone gets access to the network, the whole network. So you become an extension of the LAN. You get an IP address, and you can go east and west and move laterally. And really, ZTNA, the aim of it, and we can talk a little bit around what I mean by the aim of it, but the aim of it is to really have granular access policies to allow people just to do what they need to do their job, and nothing more. So you're significantly reducing that attack surface. So if somebody from a device that happens to get compromised in some way, then you're significantly reducing that attack surface.
Makes sense. Dave, your thoughts on that?
I obviously agree with all of that. I think something Jay touched on there around simplicity as well. I think we perhaps not yet touched on what the business drivers are for SSE, and I think security is kind of the clear and obvious one, but there's some other things around there that can help make the business case. So things like getting more simplistic technology stack that's easy to manage, that's more operationally resilient, that enables hybrid work, that helps you with cloud migrations and delivering against the cloud first strategy as a business, and then improving things like user experience as well. So reducing the path between the user and the resource they want to get to without bouncing through that data center can make a huge difference to user experience. And then once we see all this traffic going through these platforms, we start to see the metrics associated with it around latency and that kind of thing. So we can really start to benchmark user experience. Certainly, again, coming back to, as an example, cloud migration, you can look at the before and after and see what some of that stuff looks like.
Go on, sorry, Jay.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think you've mentioned one of the things that a lot of people don't talk about is visibility. We had tools when our users were on-prem and our devices were on-prem and applications were on-prem, and we protected everything with this kind of castle and moat design. We had tools that sat on-prem that enabled you to get visibility into what users were doing, what service accounts were doing, what applications were doing, what devices were doing. Obviously, with this move to more of a hybrid workforce, with users being outside of that kind of LAN, and our applications are shifting to the cloud, and obviously they've got their devices, we've lost a lot of that visibility. So being able to see and troubleshoot situations that arise, and not only that, but one of the things that a lot of people miss is what happens if you do get compromised. You want to quickly and easily be able to see where that attack has come from, maybe where the door's open, and you want to be able to shut it. One of the things that I'm seeing is a real driver for people going on this kind of ZTNA and then SSE and then SASE journey is the idea of this zero trust strategy that's coming into play. And the reason that's happening is because it's in a lot of regulation now. It's in NIS2, it's in NIST, it's in CMMC, it's in GDPR. So as much as I'm seeing a lot of people shifting because of the risks around those legacy VPNs, as we've mentioned, but also because of the rise of the requirement of having zero trust in place. And people are seeing kind of ZTNA is that first step along that zero trust journey. It's not the only step by any stretch of the imagination, and it is very much a journey. I fundamentally believe that zero trust is a strategy and not a single product. It's made up with features and capabilities from products, but we are certainly seeing people start their journey with the low-hanging fruit of the risks of legacy VPN.
Just before you go, Dave, just two things that I think is really interesting there. We talked a little bit about simplicity, the opposite of which is obviously complexity, and we see that complexity causes risk in itself, right? So I think that's really interesting. I think your point on visibility goes hand in hand with that, Jay, doesn't it? If we can simplify and if we can get good visibility, we're in a much safer space. The bit that I'm kind of interested in is that it's a great end game simplicity, but getting there isn't necessarily easy, is it? So the bit that I'm interested in with this is what are the pitfalls in deploying the kind of, an SSE project so that we can get to that simplicity.
Yeah, I want to say it's the same with any project, right? And I mean, I've been doing projects for a large proportion of my career, and it's all in the kind of design, development, and planning phase. The
Yeah.
execution then should be relatively straightforward. What I tend to see, um, and I don't want to mention any names, but what I tend to see with projects that fail are trying to bite off more than you can chew, trying to do everything in one go, trying to roll out 50,000 users overnight instead of doing it bit by bit and piece by piece, and not necessarily understanding what ZTNA is and how it's different. Um, we I was working with a large financial customer for a number of years now, and initially they wanted to do one application at a time when it came to deployment. They thought they had around 40 applications, and they thought, okay, if we onboard one at a time and we deliver them to users one at a time, and we can continue using our legacy VPN for the other applications, we'll naturally get to a point where we've deployed all of the applications. They got to over 400 applications in about 18 months and then realized they had a significant number of extra applications. It was around 4,000.
Yeah.
So it's all in the planning, right? It's all in the understanding of your current environment. And I think the difficulty is when you're moving away from a VPN that inherently gives everyone access to everything. And what I mean by that is if you create a new file server or a new application on your LAN, people automatically just get access through the VPN. You don't need to publish anything. You don't need to configure anything. And with ZTNA, it's all about granular access. It's all about onboarding those applications. So what we tend to encourage people to do is they give VPN-like access. And what I mean by that is you can give access to, say, a subnet or a VLAN or an IP range, and then you monitor what users are accessing. Because on day one, you can automatically remove a bunch of IP addresses from your network to make yourself a bit more granular, and then you take step by step. As I've mentioned before, a lot of people are starting with ZTNA, and we encourage people to look at really where their crown jewels are. And I'm a very big advocate of John Kindervag's idea of protect surfaces when it comes to zero trust. So understand what your most critical access are and protect them. And that could be ZTNA, it could be a little bit of SWIG, it could be a combination, it could be CASB because maybe your applications are in the cloud. But start small and then and grow out from that. And it could be third parties and contractors. You start there, then you replace your enterprise VPN, and then as your secure web gateway and CASB licenses expire for other applications that you've got, other vendors, then you start to consolidate and simplify. Failure happens when you decide you're going to do everything all in one go, and no matter what project that is. Zero trust is very much a journey. I like to say take small bites of the elephant. I've certainly seen people fail where they tried to set a 5-year plan, and then after 1 year, they've not really achieved anything. They've not hit any milestones. They've not been able to prove to the business that they've made progress. And then what happens is they lose their budget because it doesn't look like they've made any progress. So communicate, set up the plan properly, set milestones that you can achieve those milestones. People then get motivated. They see easy and quick wins, and then the project can continue and you start to consolidate and simplify through time. And Dave, I don't know what you're seeing. And sorry, I'd said a lot of stuff.
It's all spot on, Jay. I think the other side of it, perhaps that we haven't covered, is this isn't just a technology thing; it's a people and process thing as well. So when we talk about the planning and the project, deliverables and that side of things, it's not just an IT conversation. It has to involve the business. You have to look at the different personas of people and the different challenges that they might face. So, for example, we know that developers typically have challenges with SSL inspection and that side of things. So you've got to be cautious in the way that you turn that on and do it in a measured way. And as you said, rolling it out to a load of users in one go is a recipe for pitchforks at dawn from the user base. Ultimately, it's just going to create friction. So starting with a small, very understanding pilot group with fantastic comms and a great process that's built around not just letting them turn it off when it stops them doing something, but forcing a feedback loop that helps you tune that policy and capability, and then widening the circle out to a larger group of users and so on. So that approach then does need to tie into the wider outcomes you're looking for, in terms of whether you're looking for a risk-based approach and those crown jewel assets that you're trying to protect. There's a fantastic point about third parties, Jay, because we know that whether it's manufacturing, whether it's retail, whether it's airlines, people are using supply chain as a route into businesses. So looking after third parties can be one of the biggest ways of closing down some of those risks.
A few,
I'd
a
like
few,
to. So I was going to say I'd like to give an example or what I believe is a good use case, and it's HPE itself. Okay, so a lot of people say you should eat your own dog food. I don't like that analogy because I'd never eat dog food, no matter how good it is. I'd prefer to say I drink my own champagne. Um, when we were acquired, so when Access Security was acquired by HPE, I was deployed a new laptop and I had 4 VPNs. Um, so HPE is very acquisitional. We've made a number of acquisitions over the years, and therefore we've ended up with a whole array of different VPNs. So our IT is outsourced. So we had to go through a process of talking to the outsourcer and saying we would like you to evaluate the software that we have. We would like to drink our own champagne. We did 1,000 user trial across our environment, and as you can imagine, we have many sites in many countries, in many cities across the globe, with many different use cases, ranging from those engineers to R&D to sales forces to finance. So we did a pilot of 1,000 users. The pilot was very, very successful, and then in a period of time, 4 to 6 weeks, we rolled out 50 plus thousand users. I think we're at almost 65,000 users. So with the right communication and the right configuration, you can deploy very quickly. I mean, that's a significant amount. And we've done very similar to what I talk to prospects and customers about, is give VPN-like access, deploy quickly to remove those legacy VPNs, and then go more and more granular. So we are in the process today where we have visibility of what the users are doing, what they're connecting to, and therefore we can then start to deploy those more granular policies. My advice is don't stop when all your users are working, because yes, you may have gone a little bit more secure than you would have with your legacy VPN, but you've not set a fully granular policy. And because we can do things like tagging and we get app visibility and we can see all these things, it's straightforward to go to get that granular access. But the actual deployment, I said, took like 4 to 6 weeks. We'll probably spend the next 6 to 9 months going fully granular, but we're taking steps bit by bit to become more and more secure, to reduce that attack surface. And therefore, inherently, we can supply information back to the business that says, okay, this is our maturity, this is our increased security, even if we've migrated quickly. And I know, Dave, that's something that you talk about a lot, is taking that, kind of reducing bit by bit that risk.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you've got to see that as a journey. We talked about that risk-based approach. If you set the bar too high, and I'm not saying you shouldn't reach for the stars with it, but the reality is there's a right place and a right pace for your business. And again, if you try and get it too far and too granular, you're never really going to get there, and you're going to be left feeling disappointed. But finding that right place, but making steps towards it and having a plan to get there is important, because, as you said, otherwise everybody will high five as soon as the last user's deployed, and you think you're done, and the reality is, there's more work to do, and maybe that's part of a BAU process. Maybe there's an initial project to onboard everybody, and actually the delivery of that more granular process becomes almost part of a BAU type approach to constantly reviewing the access. Actually, well, somebody signed up for a SaaS service over there. There's all that side of things as well. I think the other thing that we've not necessarily talked about as a use case for this technology for VPN replacement is around M&A. So I didn't mention it earlier, but this way of replacing that kind of VPN type connectivity can be an enormous accelerator to being able to join two organizations when there's been an acquisition or a merger take place. Because typically at that point, you'd try and join the networks, you'd try and peer to MPLSs, or you'd try and stick a VPN between them. You'd realize that there's some IP clashes that need to be harmonized, and it takes months, and it takes a long time, right? But with this kind of technology, ultimately, you're leveraging, you're kind of removing the network from the equation, and you're really focusing on what users should get access to what resources. You take the network out of that, and you can deploy very quickly into an acquired business and start to see value there. So again, realize we're kind of looping back to use cases there now. But
No, I think you're right. I mean, my background is a lot of mergers and acquisitions, and as as I went through my career and time progressed, there was more and more pressure on day one activities. There was more and more pressure on giving critical users access to critical resources across businesses. And as much as we would do as much due diligence as we possibly could, on top of there potentially being IP conflicts, you're also pretty much back then being forced to connect two entities together when one of them you cannot trust 100% or don't know if you can trust. And you are also connecting users that are coming from devices that you also cannot be 100% sure, because they don't have your software on, they don't have your virus protection, they don't have maybe your patch level. And that's not to say that they're not as good, but you don't know. So being able to give kind of agentless access and treat them as if they're third parties and contractors, and allow them to get into critical assets like, I don't know, finance systems, ERP systems, or even getting into your intranet to read critical policies, doing those kind of things without deploying an agent, without opening up that environment, is certainly a use case I see a significant amount of times. A lot of our very early adopters of our technology either start with that third party and contractor, or we've got businesses that have acquired our agentless offering just for that mergers and acquisitions, as you've just said.
Just quickly, a couple of things. I'd like to go back a little bit earlier in this conversation, because there's one aspect that I'm particularly keen to hear about. You mentioned granularity. We've mentioned granularity a fair amount in terms of control in this conversation, and I guess the bit that I'm not concerned about, the bit where I think people maybe make the mistake, is with that granularity, there's potentially some planning that needs to do around that. And you mentioned, the crown jewels, Dave, and understanding your assets really. And this is this piece of classification. I like this kind of 3-letter, classify, control, connect kind of theme. And this classification bit sometimes seems to catch people out because they haven't done the planning they need to before the input. Things like DLP is a really good example for that, right? But any quick thoughts on that before we move on?
It's been difficult historically because it needs engagement with the business. When you come to classifying things, you need to surface data owners and application owners. And application owners is a lot easier than data owners. But every business there is has got a quiet corner of unstructured data that's not been touched for 5 years, and everybody's too scared to delete it, and nobody wants to take ownership of it. And that classification can be quite difficult. We're heading towards a world where there's more tooling available now that can help you with automatic classification, but you're absolutely right. In terms of granularity, Martin, you can start wide, but you know, Jay, you talked about the visibility of who's accessing what, and then being able to kind of decide whether that's appropriate. Somebody needs to decide whether that's appropriate. You need to take
Yeah.
you need to take that to an app owner and go, hey, these 10,000 people can access your application. Is that appropriate? And they're going to look at you and go, well, I don't know. I guess so,
Yeah.
or not. Do they have ownership? Do they have accountability for the access to that? And we're sort of maybe heading into an identity conversation there as much as anything. But that business engagement is really key to how you get to that
Let,
granularity.
let me
I
just
think
move.
that I was going to say, I think the key thing is we're in a situation today where, and I know I've mentioned this before, but users are on the road, applications are in the cloud, some of them are on-prem, they're connecting from coffee shops or their home or on the train or an airport, or they're in an office, but they might be on the guest network. And as of today, we don't really know what they're doing, what they're accessing on a daily basis. And you cannot protect if you can't see. So yes, I agree with what Dave said in regards to you have to at some point go back to the owners of the applications or the data, and that can be a more complicated discussion. But if you're armed with the right information around these users are accessing this SaaS application, should they be doing it? Are you aware that this file server that users are connecting to, they're uploading this data into Dropbox or OneDrive or any equivalent? Are you aware that this stuff is traversing from your remote users to your on-prem users? If you can go armed with that information, whether you're the CISO or the CIO or an architect within the business, you can start to have those conversations. We are certainly seeing when we deploy our tools that people are shocked and were unaware of some of the things that were going on. We've uncovered people that have left the business a long time ago, but still have a corporate machine that they were gifted when they left. It's still got the VPN on it, it's still connecting. Or we've got people that are spent the last 5 years working in finance, but they started as a graduate in sales and they've still got access to all the sales applications, etc. So being able to see those things gives you the foundation at least to be able to start going having those conversations. And yes, I agree that they're not the easiest, but if you go armed with the information, then you are in a
Yeah.
much better position.
I think if you ask someone who should have access to something versus telling them these people are accessing this thing, it's a it's a very different conversation.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay, so I think some really good points there that will help people out. The, I guess one thing that's always really nice to kind of look at when you're embarking on a kind of plan like this, a project like this, is what's the end game? What situation are we going to be in once we've done all of this? Can you give everyone a little bit of your thinking in terms of how that will transform the organization and how much better things look from a few different aspects once a successful deployment's happened?
Um, okay, so I don't believe we're ever going to end. And what I mean by that is this is always going to be an iterative process.
Yeah,
Our environments change, the cyber attacks change, our attack surfaces change, technology changes, people change, people come in and out of businesses. Therefore, you need to continue to iterate and take those steps. You're not going to just be able to deploy and forget. I think historically we have done those things and we've kind of deployed the technology, or we've even bought technologies and put them on the shelf and never deployed them, or never deployed them at their full capabilities. And then you come around to renewal time in say 3 to 5 years and you're like, well, we've never really used this, so let's not renew it, let's take it out.
yeah,
We need to stop doing that. Where businesses are inherently gonna to to get to if they deploy these kind of tools correctly is a more secure environment. I've spent most of my career trying to simplify and consolidate whilst trying to keep the users happy. We have to remember in all of this that user experience is critical. It's not something we've spoke about that much today, but it is critical to make sure that whatever we do, whatever we implement, the business can continue to run. IT and security should really be an enabler. I've got one story to tell you in regards to VPN replacement. I had a conversation, I want to say about a year ago now, with a large company in the UK that had called me in to do some consultancy work, and they'd been compromised with a ransomware attack through their VPN. And they'd paid 18 million in the ransomware, not including the downtime, the perception, the brand damage, all of those kind of things. And I sat down and I said to them, you should look at his ETNA. And by the way, we have one. We had a conversation around it. I went back about 9 months later, and they'd been compromised again through the same hole, through the same VPN, and paid another 14 million. And we had a conversation around, why haven't you moved forward? And they said, because we don't have budget. I kind of try not to laugh or smile, because I'm like, you've spent 30+ million on ransomwares and you say you don't have budget. And if I'm honest, at that point, I said to them, look, if you're not happy with what we are offering, please just go and buy something. Replace your VPN. I still had my kind of customer hat on, and I'm like, I don't want to come back again in another 6 months and you have been compromised again, because I could see the look on the IT team and security team's faces that they'd gone through the ringer, and they were struggling. And therefore, for me, and I asked John Kindervag the question when I met him, I said, where should people start their journey on Zero Trust? Can you give me some advice? And he said, very good answer, it's not where should you start, it's that you should start. So a lot of people today are talking about Zero Trust and talking about the journey, but they're not starting, they're not putting the stake in the ground and moving forward. And if you don't move forward, there's a good chance, or a more higher chance, that you unfortunately will be at the end of some form of attack. And I don't want anybody to be there. So I think people should move forward, because your question was around what businesses will get from this. They will become more secure. I don't necessarily believe that we'll get to 100%, but at the moment, people are nowhere near 100%. And I work in a vendor now so that I can try and help people, as do you guys. And I want people to take that initial step.
Yeah. Dave, any thoughts?
I think the prevarication can be, it's too easy to navel gaze, right? And where do you start? And I think taking that risk-based approach and looking at where your biggest risk is and doing something about it there. And that's got to be the starting point in reality, because we know that Zero Trust as a journey is ultimately a risk reduction program. But as Jay said, we've got to remember that what we're trying to do as well is enable the business. So we want to do it in a way where we're not introducing friction. We want to connect users and devices to apps and resources, but to do it in that secure way, and take that journey. But start, as Jay said, don't just sit around and think about it.
That makes sense. And we've talked about it being this kind of iterative process, really. So what sort of things do people consider when this moves into a run state? Obviously, we've talked about maybe developing granularity, etc. But is there anything else from a kind of technology management point of view that people should be considering?
New features. Don't consider it as a one-time deployment. You might get to your granular policy, but as Jay said, the threat landscape's changing, and the tooling changes to accommodate or to try and combat that threat landscape. So to put something in and then 3 years later wonder why you've been breached, well, there's a whole host of features in there that you've not turned on, and they didn't exist when you put the tool in. You've got to go along that continuous improvement journey. So there's the process, there's the policy side of it, but don't ignore all those new features. And when you're looking at these kind of programs, it's not just about setting aside money for the initial tooling and the initial deployment. It's about having the right teams or service or advisory capability into the business that helps you continually mature the delivery of that tooling to help keep protecting you as the threat landscape changes.
I think you've raised a really good point there. So I've spent 25 plus years on the customer side, and like most IT and security parts of the business, my staff was very lean. I had a very small number of people. So I would go to conferences, I would go to round tables, I would meet my peers, I would make relationships with partners and vendors so that I could understand what everyone else was doing. SSE is relatively new. It's a relatively it's still being developed. It's not set in stone yet. So yes, there are new features coming out, but you need to make sure that you've got a good relationship with the people you're buying from your peers, from other people in the verticals that you work in, to understand what the environment looks like. Firstly, what are the attacks looking like? How are they changing? How are the cyber criminals adapting? How is the technology that you've purchased adapting? And how are other people? I came from manufacturing, so how are other people in the manufacturing vertical protecting themselves? What are they seeing as good? What are they seeing as bad? And people like yourselves in a vendor that you can partner with can give you that information. I would quite often go to my salesperson within the vendor and say, can I please talk to your other, or at least three other manufacturing companies to understand? Can you bring us together for a lunch and learn so I can understand? Because as you've said, Dave, that the environment's changing at a rapid pace. The technology is also changing at a rapid pace. You need to be aware of that so you can tie the two together. If you just deploy and leave, you may be missing out on some opportunities to enhance your protection, or it may well be that you're pivoting and things are just changing naturally. Cyber attacks, yes, ransomware is still there and it's still the most prevalent attack, but they're now starting to not just hold you at ransom for the de-encryption, but they're selling it on the dark web, or they're now starting to hold people ransom for things that they found out about people and that shouldn't be leaked. If we have this conversation in 5 years' time, I can guarantee the world is going to be very, very different from an attack perspective and from a technology perspective. You need to keep up to speed with both of those.
Agreed. And I guess I think we've covered some interesting topics there this morning, guys. So thanks for that. I guess to close, Jay, if I can turn to you, what do you want people to really take away from this discussion?
That they need to start the zero trust journey. It's everywhere today. The threats of legacy VPNs are on everyone's mind, but so is the need to deploy zero trust. One of the most critical things I'm seeing is the change of governance, the change of the requirements from businesses. Like I said, I came from manufacturing, and I'm still very, very close to that business, and they now have to prove a certain level of maturity with zero trust to be able to win certain contracts. That's inevitably going to increase. So it's everywhere. So start to consider, if you haven't, where you're going to start that journey. The most critical thing is ensure that you actually start it.
Yeah, good advice, I think. And Dave, what do you think is the most important thing we've covered today?
Think big, act small. Yeah, chunk it up so that it's achievable. Jay talked about eating the elephant, right? You're not going to get it all in one bite, so start somewhere and keep at it, keep the momentum, and the other side of it is keep contact and communication strong with the business. People will come along on the journey much better if you're doing it with them rather than if you're doing it to them.
Agreed.
Good thoughts. Well, thanks both for your time. Really appreciate it. Thanks to the listeners and viewers, and everybody have a good day.
Thank you very much.
Thanks all. Bye.